So it's really interesting to hear you speak. I really liked your different perspectives on the issues and the relationship. So I was wondering, what was the one thing that you hope everyone here will take away with them?
I would say the importance of mutual understanding among major powers. In this particular context is China, Japan, and the United States. I do feel after all those post-war decades, still great need for people, particularly young students and general public, to understand deeply each other. Like I mentioned earlier, there are imbalanced circumstances really need to be corrected. So this is my hope.
And one of the circumstances you mentioned was the view on working together and being cooperative versus being too competitive. And you mentioned how hopefully we could combine it so there's a little bit of each. How do you suggest that both countries do that?
I would say many people believe there are much rooms for all three countries to cooperate. Particularly, there is a concept so-called human-kind community. Of course, it's a little bit idealistic. But at the same time, there's also specific areas for cooperation. Economic, infrastructure, not to mention later there are some audience ask about climate change, about environmental protection, about natural disasters. So those issues is really needed. So here we're talking about number one, number two, number three economies. Those three economies, they should have their responsibility not only to their own people, but also to the whole mankind. But to be specific, those countries can also not only among themselves to cooperate, but also so-called the third country project. They may work in Africa, in Southeast Asia, in South Asia, in Middle East. So there are much developing world really need those three top economies to help. But at the same time, one cannot, like I quote Matthew Pottinger emphasized, competition. Competition is one of the key elements of free market, which also only natural for the powers to also have the competitive part. But competitive part need also to follow common ground. That is what we say, the rules, the norms, the international law, and all related party need, of course, to follow those rules. And like Matthew Pottinger pointed out, competition not necessarily a bad thing. Yeah, there are, particularly in a free market, you compete each other, then you produce the best or the better materials than others. So there is a balanced position between cooperation and competition. Recently, I had Chinese TV called Phoenix TV, based in Hong Kong, asked me about this bilateral relations between China and the United States. I answered is that the two powers should do their best to cooperate in many different issues. At the same time, they should not also afraid of a competition. So this is a good combination, I think.
So what do you think the next step would be in reaching that good combination and that good balance?
I would say again, increasing mutual understanding, increasing the exchange rather than cutting human relations. Both society nowadays with trade war, they have certain sectors of their each society calling for decouple. Say, hey, let's separate. I don't think that's work. Not only because deeply interdependence, like I pointed out, but also it's not good. It's mutually damaging.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you also mentioned how the leaders play a really important part of building a country's policy and how they interact with other nations. So what were your comments or reactions to the meeting on Saturday with Xi Jinping and Trump?
I think it's a productive meeting. They at least stabilized relationship between these two major powers. So that is very positive. At the same time, I think this is only one of many steps. There are many issues remain unsolved, unsettled. For example, Trump made clear there is a 90-day deadline.
Yeah.
After that,
very clear.
It may or may not have started trade war again. So in other words, the two countries still need to work hard to communicate, to negotiate. Actually, I don't think negotiation is a bad thing, and I don't think a compromise is a bad thing, because trade war, by definition, is trade and economic interest. If you really would like to see a win-win solution, you have to have compromise from each side.
And then another big aspect of your presentation, you talked a lot about the histories and how that's shaped the country's beliefs today. What major impact do you believe that all these countries' pasts have in working out their future and current problems?
Naturally, today's power relationship grow out past experience. War, World War II, post-war, Cold War, post-Cold War, and Trump, Xi, Abe. All those evolution, we have to look at that. For example, so-called the issue of history in East Asia. Why is it so important? Because one has to recognize the past and make correct attitude, and then put that page over, move forward. This is what happened actually if you think about the San Francisco Treaty between Japan and the United States. This is what happened actually when President Obama visited Hiroshima, when Abe Shinzo visited Pearl Harbor. So continue to make effort for reconciliation. Why couldn't Japan and China make similar moves in this historical events with regard to those historical events? So just like what the U.S. and Japan did, China and Japan should also develop.
So right now it's almost as if one side of the triangle is building up those relationships again and the other side isn't making as much of an effort to?
Not necessarily. U.S., Japan, they're making. But if you look at Japan, China, they are starting working on that.
So are you hopeful that these relationships will get better in the future?
I would think so. You can see from today's discussion, I'm one of the optimistic rather than others say, hey, no way for China to improve.
Mm-hmm.
I say, why not? If you
Yeah.
think about it.
And you mentioned you had the 5 reasons for the shifting in these relationships. What do you think, if they were to get better, would be the main cause of that?
I would say national interest, of course, naturally would be the fundamental base.
Mm-hmm.
That's why I emphasized they do have common, not necessarily only competitive interest. They also have common interest. And another, of course, I think the leadership wisdom, the domestic, the diplomatic opportunity, all those are important. Think about Nixon and Kissinger. They really faced opportunity to open up China. I think that's a historical.
And then I have one last question for you. So as we are approaching the 40th anniversary of the establishment between China and the United States, diplomatic relations, what is your assessment on the past 40 years, and where do you think the relationships are heading?
That would be next month. I think the two countries have experienced, I would say, remarkable progress, the bilateral relations. Remember, the two countries used to be enemy during Cold War. It's not open to each other until Nixon and Kissinger. And now General Schoolcraft, he likes to use a half-filled bottle to describe the relationship. He said, let's say, suppose it's here, the line. He said, if you think there are no progress between the two countries, you look at this part.
Yeah.
Then you will see actually that's huge. But if you think there are no room for improvement, you look at this part. So there are empty part. But no, now I think is coming to a critical time, particularly under Donald Trump. That, again, like I said, both sides of society had a force calling for decouple. That's to separate the two societies from all fields, even including academic exchange, such as the student exchange. I don't think that's correct. It should encourage for maintaining those contacts and in all related fields. And I just made a suggestion to Professor Cannon's panel that is in Washington should encourage, and Seattle should, because there is a National Bureau of Asian Studies, should encourage policy discussion with different opinions. Some more severe with China, say. Some say, well, we have to look at objectively. So I think it's more balanced view really necessary. There are many historical junctures. Like when Chiang Kai-shek was defeated and fled to Taiwan, there was debate in United States. Who lost China, right? And then there's another debate in Nixon time, whether it should open. And there's another debate when Soviet Union collapsed, that what the policy should. And there's another debate when China rising, just like when Japan rising, right? So a lot of those, I think those debates are heresy. We should encourage. But when we have those debates, like I talked with Professor Pell, that we should pay attention to balance the view. We should have variety of opinions, not only one say, hey, Donald Trump said we should punish China, we should do that. I don't think that's heresy.
Well, thank you so much. It was really nice to get to speak.